Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, January 8th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about the 2022 United States Senate election. So, first things first, if you think that I sound different, I don't think that I do, but I think I might be coming down with something. I'm just really congested, so yeah. But if I sound different, that's the reason why. And obviously, number two, we're going to be talking about these Senate elections because what we're looking at is that the fact that Donald Trump's continued interest in the GOP might actually hinder the GOP in the 2022 Senate elections and really the 2022 midterms. But the Senate elections, I think, is an area where the Democratic Party can actually do some heavy damage control. There was a poll released yesterday that showed that the majority of Republicans wanted Donald Trump to maintain a continued stake in the Republican Party. They had around 40 to 45% wanting him to take a very major role, and then an additional 20 to 30% wanting him to take a somewhat minor role, but still a role in the Republican Party regardless. Only around 1 in 4 Republicans actually said Donald Trump should not take a role in the continued interest of the GOP because he just lost an election. He's the first president since the 1930s to lose the House, the Senate, and of course the presidency. So obviously, the Republican Party would not want to repeat that in future elections. So looking at Donald Trump as a person, it's very likely he will still maintain a pretty notable presence in the GOP. I would not be shocked whatsoever if that happens. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 2022 Senate elections and talk about why I think that Donald Trump's continued interest in the GOP will inevitably hurt them across numerous states, numerous battleground states. And I know it seems way too early to be talking about 2022, but 2018 was a year where the Democratic Party won the popular vote in the Senate by 20%, despite losing a net 2 seats. You see, the Senate elections aren't held in every single state, so only around 35 states were up in 2018 due to special elections. Coincidentally, 35 states were also up in 2020. In 2022, it looks as if we may have a total of 34 seats, but it's possible we get a retirement or some type of special election due to a Joe Biden administration appointment. But looking at 2018, what we're looking at is the fact that the Democratic Party lost 2 seats, but you have to question, why this happened. The Democratic Party did well, I would say. They did well in the House elections. They were able to pick up, a number of seats, rise up to mid-230s in the United States House, despite being under 200 prior to the election. And the Senate elections were expected to go slightly better for the Democratic Party had they been able to win in some of these red states. But polarization seems to have surpassed the Democratic Party and the Democratic incumbents in some of these states. You wouldn't be surprised to see a Republican win in Missouri, Indiana, or North Dakota. But when it happened in 2018, they had Democratic incumbents who had won back in 2012. But obviously this year seemed to be the year where the Democratic Party could do better, but polarization was just too great to a point where Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota lost by around 10 points. I believe that Joe Donnelly lost by a similar margin and Claire McCaskill. So these candidates lost by significant amounts, but much better than other Democrats have in the past, but still, a loss is a loss. So these 3 states, I wasn't too surprised by, but Florida definitely threw me for a loop. Now, following the 2020 election results where Florida actually shifted to the right of where it voted in 2016, it's one of the few states to actually do that, one of the few states, I think there's 8 or 9 nationwide. Looking at this, I'm not all too surprised. So now the state of Florida has a Republican governor, 2 Republican senators, obviously a Republican presidential victory in both 2016 and 2020, and a majority of Republicans in the House of Representatives. So looking at Florida, it seems to be a state that on paper wouldn't necessarily be competitive, but the Democratic Party continues to vie for it every election season. But this year, this 2022 Senate year, I think it'll be slightly different. I don't think the Democratic Party is going to focus too heavily on the Florida results, just because they know historically they don't have the best shot at winning there. But then again, they thought the same exact thing about Georgia. The good thing about this map is I no longer have to make a Georgia characterization. I can actually just characterize the solid race, which is John Ossoff's race. He will be serving until 2022, as solid for the Democratic Party because it's a done deal. There, of course, are other solid Democratic states, but that's the one that isn't up for re-election, so it actually doesn't need to be on this map any longer. So we're going to characterize all of the safe Democratic states, and where does that actually put them? Well, it puts them at a total of 45 seats. They still need an additional 5 in order to retain Senate control. Well, there are some Republican safe states that shouldn't be too surprising either. Some of these states were competitive in 2020, but not so much in 2022, just because they have more, better known Republican incumbents and more popular Republican incumbents. And I can't imagine in a year that's expected to be a Republican wave, the Democratic Party would be trying to win a race in Kansas again, or a race in North Dakota again. So looking at all of the safe Republican races, that brings us to a total of 44 seats for the GOP. Well, that's a pretty good start off. I'm actually going to remove Alaska. I'm actually going to remove Alaska from the safe Republican column. I think that one's likely just because they have ranked choice voting. We could see something special happen, but looking at the state of Alaska, it's probably going to end up with 2 conservatives, and then the Democrats are going to split for Lisa Murkowski. But again, that's all to be discussed in the time when I characterize it as likely, just because initial characterization, Lisa Murkowski is unpopular. That's true. It's possible she could lose her Senate race. Maybe not to a Democrat, though. So maybe to an independent, but that wouldn't be safe Republican. There wouldn't be 2 Republicans on the ballot. So looking at the 12 total toss-up races, some of these are actually likely for their respective parties. So we can characterize those right now. I think Colorado is going to be likely for the Democrats. And I think that actually might be, New Hampshire. I realize that New Hampshire, I'm not going to characterize as lean unless Chris Sununu announces that he's going to run for Senate. It's possible that he does try to run if this ends up being a Republican wave year. But also, Joe Biden might actually enjoy the benefits of a recovering economy, COVID vaccine distribution, and the eradication of a global pandemic. So if that happens, it's possible 2022 is slightly more favorable to Democrats than expected, but Chris Sununu might take this as an opportunity to try to run for Senate. And if he does, I will change the characterization, but initially, I'm going to say likely for the Democratic Party. But looking at 2022, what would Donald Trump's impact actually, hold on the Republican Party? Well, it's no secret that many Republicans still support President Trump and supported the effort to overturn the election results. The majority of House Republicans voted to uphold the objection to the states of Arizona and Pennsylvania. In the United States Senate, it was a much different story with around 45 Republican senators voting against objection to certain states, and then around 5, 6, actually I think in some cases 7 senators voting to uphold the objection. Most notably Ted Cruz or Josh Hawley. But some of these Republicans actually walked back following the insurrection at the Capitol yesterday, and I think that's largely due to the fact that some of them are up for re-election soon. Kelly Loeffler just lost her Senate race, and she withdrew her plan to contest the election results, and I think that's largely due to the fact that there was the huge thing that happened at the Capitol, not yesterday, 2 days ago, which probably changed her mind. But on top of that, the voters of Georgia just rejected her. So I can't imagine that would be something that they want to look at and say, why not continue? So Kelly Loeffler changed her mind. Ron Johnson, also the senator from Wisconsin who's up in 2022, went into the congressional building with every intention to object to the election results. But he ended up not objecting to the election results, changed his mind following everything that happened, not yesterday. I don't know why I keep saying yesterday, 2 days ago. So he might actually be trying to save his re-election bid. He pledged to not run for a third term in 2019, changed his mind in 2020 once it started to look like Joe Biden was going to win the presidency, which of course would in turn be a Republican wave year by history, but we don't know for sure yet in 2022. So he could still be running for a third term, but I still think the initial plan to even go in there to make a statement that he would object to the election results in a state that went to Joe Biden, I don't think that's something that can play well amongst the voters in the state of Wisconsin. It certainly didn't work in Georgia, and Wisconsin is not necessarily more not necessarily more conservative than Georgia by any means. It just has a voter base that the Democratic Party was able to tap into in 2018, but Donald Trump swung them by a very considerable amount. So Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson could be in for a little bit of an issue. We're actually going to characterize the likely Republican states really briefly. I think Iowa, Ohio, and also Marco Rubio's seat, because he has been more recently a firm opponent of President Trump and what he's been trying to do. Obviously he had to stick with him through the entire presidency, but it seems as if he's trying to sever ties with President Trump. And Marco Rubio, I think, is someone who could do very well in a state such as Florida. He's a good orator. I would be surprised if he didn't try to run for president in 2024, and I would not be surprised whatsoever if he won Florida by a considerable amount in the 2022 midterm elections. But the other likely Republican state is the state of Alaska, and I think that's a state where, like I mentioned previously, they just passed ranked choice voting. Lisa Murkowski could be in for a bit of trouble, but chances are she'll end up winning it based off Democratic votes once it gets down to those rounds, because it'll likely end up become a race between 2 conservatives, and then as a result, the Democrats are going to, of course, split for Lisa Murkowski because she's been a much more moderate Republican than possibly Miller or any other Republican that tries to run in the state of Alaska. So looking at Alaska, I'm going to characterize it as likely for right now, just as an initial characterization, but hands off for right now. We will see what happens and make a future characterization based off who actually runs. But President Trump lost the states of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, yet still wanted these states to be contested. Pat Toomey has said essentially that Donald Trump is, I would say, crazy. You know, Pat Toomey does not like Donald Trump. He said he had supported him back in 2020, but that it's time to move on, and has criticized President Trump and everything that's happened 2 days ago vehemently. And I think Ron Johnson definitely is someone who's going to be in for a bit of trouble, because he did go into that Capitol building saying that he was going to vote to uphold the objections to certain states. Pennsylvania, Arizona. These are 2 states that voted for Joe Biden, and there's no proof of voter fraud, and yet he still was going to uphold the objection. Well, Wisconsin is another one of those states, like Pennsylvania, like Arizona, that flipped from Donald Trump in the 2016 election to 2020. Well, imagine how well that would play amongst a voter base that changed their votes, and here you have your senators saying that the vote was rigged, that your vote wasn't actually your vote, that Joe Biden rigged the election. If you're someone who supported Obama twice and then went to Trump because you liked his economic plan, or you liked his appeal to you as a person, and then you changed your mind in 2020, you voted for Joe Biden because you thought, you know, after this pandemic, you know, maybe you don't want to support President Trump again. Well, Ron Johnson is here, had every intention of delegitimizing tens of millions of voters. If it wasn't just Pennsylvania and Arizona, it was going to be Wisconsin. Wisconsin was another state that was going to be contested. Following 2 days ago, the attempted coup at the Capitol, Wisconsin was always going to be contested. It was going to be a state that was going to be contested by the Republican Party. And he was likely to uphold that unless the events that occurred, you know, if they didn't transpire, the Republican Party probably would have upheld it. And not the entire Republican Party, Ron Johnson and a couple of other senators and the majority of the House GOP. But I definitely think that's something that would have hurt him even more. But I think the initial plan to even go in there and consider not voting for the results is something that was encouraged by President Trump, and as a result is hurting Republicans. Because when these Republicans sided with him, all they had to do was say Joe Biden won the election. But they were too afraid of losing their Trump base. And Donald Trump put them in a very difficult position. Either you agree that the election isn't over, or you get primaried in 2022. That was the difficult situation. Had Donald Trump just accepted the election results 4 days after the election when he lost 4 days after the election, had he conceded, many Republicans would be in a much better position right now. What happened at the Capitol would not have happened. Wednesday would not have occurred. There wouldn't have been this riot if Donald Trump had not spread these baseless claims of voter fraud and voter suppression amongst the Republican Party. Had this not happened, had Donald Trump not continued to try to argue that the election wasn't over, that there was going to be a next step, whether it was the Supreme Court, whether it was the governor's mansion, whether it was the state legislatures, whether it was the smaller courts, whether it was congressional certification. President Trump continued to push this narrative that the election wasn't over, all to receive the same result, and that's a defeat, 306 to 232. The same exact result, 306 to 232. All of that pain, all of that suffering that occurred on Wednesday, all of that hundreds of millions of dollars fundraised for a Trump legal team from November onward, for what? To lose the election in the same exact way, because they had no proof of voter fraud. It was a cash grab, and it worked. And it worked. But that's also something that's going to negatively impact Republicans down the line. Because when you look at the Democratic Party, they just won the United States Senate. I would say they have a lean chance at winning Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. They could be competitive, but initial ratings, I wouldn't say the Republican Party is the favorite. I would also characterize the state of North Carolina as a toss-up race. When you see a number of these Republicans that very much enabled President Trump in his endeavors, well, they paid the price for it in Georgia. And many of these Republicans who have been critics of the Democratic Party and, saying that the election results may have been rigged, even floating that, brings them to direct responsibility about what occurred on Wednesday. Everything that was argued by the Republican Party is going to negatively hit them. It's going to come back to them. When you see the pictures of Josh Hawley encouraging these rioters in the Capitol building, or, in the morning of right before, that's not something that would play well when you're trying to run for president or trying to run for re-election. Missouri is a Republican state, so I would say senators like Josh Hawley are fine. But when you have Ron Johnson, who continuously spent the last 2 months arguing that the election results were fraudulent, declaring that he was going to object to the election results in this state, not a good sign. When you have a retiring incumbent in Pennsylvania who has been extremely outspoken of President Trump, that could actually hurt the GOP. I think Pat Toomey could have won re-election, but the fact that there's a divide in the Republican Party in Pennsylvania and a number of other competitive states, it's going to make it difficult for the GOP to coalesce around a candidate, and the Democratic Party could swoop in and take that race. In North Carolina, we could see the same exact thing happen. It's neighboring to Georgia. In fact, it's had a much more stronger Democratic history than Georgia, I would say, in modern political history, but 2020 wasn't the year. 2020 was not the year in which the Democratic Party won there. 2022 could be. 2022 could be a year where the Democratic Party could actually do much better because of everything that Joe Biden is going to enjoy as a president. His approval rating will be much higher than President Trump's, just because of vaccine distribution, economic recovery, and just not tweeting. President Trump really took a hurt in character every single time he sent out one of those tweets. It really hurt him as a candidate, and he paid the price for it in the 2020 presidential election. And Republicans paid the price for it in the United States Senate, losing it for the first time since 2012. So looking at the result here, Georgia was not an anomaly. It's a warning sign for the GOP. Because usually after a president is elected, the opposition party does much better in the elections that immediately follow, because it's sent to serve as a referendum against the incoming administration or a check against the incoming administration. When you have a president who refused to accept the election results up until yesterday, 2 months, more than that, after the election, you can't use that argument. You can't use, I'm going to be a check on a president, when your party is saying that president isn't going to be coming in. And it took all of this pain, all of this suffering, all of this money spent for the Republican Party to just lose 2 more Senate seats, lose control of the Senate, and have the same exact presidential result. All for what? All to appease Donald Trump as a person, to appease Donald Trump as a president, and Republicans are likely to pay the price for it, not only in Georgia, not only in upcoming elections, 2022, 2024. This is going to follow Republicans for probably the rest of their political careers. Because what transpired on Wednesday was the first time the Capitol building was breached since the War of 1812. And it wasn't even domestic invaders. It was the British. 206 years since the last time we had invaders in the Capitol building. And then we had rioters. Some go far as to call them domestic terrorists. They came into the Capitol building. They broke through. And that was a very dark day in American history. By no means the darkest, but something that definitely doesn't shine a good light on our recent political history. Imagine you are a viewer from the United Kingdom viewing into this, and you talk about, why did this happen? How were there 100,000 people on the Capitol grounds believing the election was rigged? Comes down to one candidate and 50 senators that encouraged this. Some of them were immediately opposed to it, so maybe around 40. The majority of the GOP House still upheld even after everything that transpired. Can you imagine the numbers that would have been before? And a lot of them are afraid of being primaried in 2022. Donald Trump held the rally the same day as the riots, arguing that the Republican Party should primary anyone that didn't go with the objection to the Electoral College results. And House of Representatives members are up every 2 years, and many of them come from very solid Trump districts. So many of them were afraid. Some of these senators are, they're up in 6 years. They're up in 4 years. They can actually, try to change the narrative by the time they get there. Some of these representatives go right into re-election mode immediately as they're sworn in. So the House of Representatives could be an area where the Republican Party Donald Trump had a stronger grip just because of the very close proximity of their elections every 2 years. Some of these senators knew that they would be up in 26 or knew they would be up in 24 and probably could change the narrative by then. But still, many of these people went in because they had their representatives telling them the election was rigged. They had their senators telling them the election was rigged. They had their president telling them that the election was rigged. And it's only going to look negatively for the GOP. So 2022 may not be that Republican wave year that we're expecting because of one person who caused all of this to happen, really. Caused all of this to happen. You can't argue that, Republicans are coming out and saying Donald Trump is the reason for what happened at the Capitol building. All to receive the same exact result on the presidential margin. So that's something that the Republican Party is going to have to contemplate. Was it really worth it? The answer is absolutely going to be no, but they're going to have to do some damage control. They're going to have to start writing statements for some of these senators who planned to object the election results until they were personally, felt violated by what happened in the Capitol. It should not have taken that. Should not have taken all of this to happen in order for these senators to just uphold the election results when there's no evidence of voter fraud. That is the problem. And that's something the American people are going to view negatively through 2022, 2024, and possibly any type of future political aspirations that the senators and representatives have. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist where I post 2020 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.